You made me your maid, and that was the biggest mistake of your life. I'm not joking, Ned. In 5 minutes, when the $430,000 bill arrives, I'll be canceling this wedding.
You made me your maid, and that was the biggest mistake of your life. I'm not joking. In 5 minutes, when the $430,000 bill arrives, I'll be canceling this wedding. No one in that grand ballroom knew that the radiant bride standing there once treated me like garbage. Years ago, I bowed my head as a maid in her mansion, enduring humiliation and cruelty in silence. But today, everything is different. I stand here as the owner of the very hotel where her lavish wedding is taking place. And in just a few minutes, she will finally understand the true cost of arrogance. Thank you for staying and listening to this story. Tell me, where are you watching from? Stories about dignity, justice, and the price of pride. They remind us that life always finds its own way to balance everything. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 45, dark-skinned American, and I've spent my whole life working with my hands. I own a small industrial cleaning company on the outskirts of Baltimore, where the smell of chemicals, sweat, and the hum of floor polishers have soaked into my veins. For 30 years, I've never feared dirt, only the moment my heart might be treated as dirty by people who believe they're cleaner than me. I raised my son alone. Ethan is the only light I've ever had since his father left, the reason I worked 16-hour days, the reason these calloused hands still feel worthy. Every dream I've ever had lived in that boy's eyes. When Ethan graduated as an engineer, I told him through sweat and pride, as long as you're happy, I can bear anything. I didn't know that sentence would become the price of my own dignity. I spent every dollar I had, $430,000, to give my son the wedding he dreamed of. I wanted Ethan to be happy, and I wanted Lydia, his rich bride from Connecticut, to feel loved like my own daughter. I chose every bouquet myself, signed every contract, even cleaned the venue when the staff left late. I thought, this is my son's day. I'll make it perfect no matter what. Marcus Reed, the venue's financial director, was the first to recognize me. When our eyes met, he froze, caught between the chill of the air conditioner and the glare of white neon lights. 10 years ago, he'd been homeless, a man I once hired to clean my house in the middle of a snowstorm. I gave him gloves, a broom, and said, "Everyone deserves a chance to start over." Now he stood before me in a tailored suit, a name tag on his chest, eyes filled with gratitude. "Miss Carter," he said, "it's been a long time. You gave me a job once. Let me make sure everything goes right for you." I smiled. "No debts between us, Marcus. Just do your job." I didn't know that gentle refusal would set destiny in motion. The day of the dress fitting, I sat in a bright white room filled with mirrors and soft laughter. Lydia stood tall before the glass, flawless skin, golden curls holding a bouquet sample in her hands. I brought a few fabric swatches I thought would match the decor. She glanced at them, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, Naomi, we just have different styles, don't we?" Her voice was soft, but it cut deep. She called me Naomi, not Mom, not Mrs. Carter, just Naomi, like a staff member who'd walked into the wrong room. I stood there, still holding the fabric, forcing a small smile. "Pick whatever makes you happy," I said quietly. Ethan walked in, radiant in his fitted suit. He kissed Lydia's cheek, talking about lighting and color palettes, about how perfect everything looked. I stood in the corner, invisible, watching the two of them laugh like I wasn't even there. For the first time, I realized I didn't belong in this world they were building. Marcus passed by the doorway, his eyes finding mine. He didn't say a word, but I saw the understanding there, and maybe a warning. I shook my head. I didn't need pity. Silence, I thought, would be enough to keep peace. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, a single bulb buzzing overhead. I opened the wedding contracts again. Each number, each line, each signature, all written in my own trembling hand. Not from fear, but from pride. Those pages were my life's work. What I didn't know was that those signatures would become the key to everything that came next. When the city slept, I stayed by the window, the lights outside reflecting off my dark skin. I wondered if Lydia had ever truly seen me, or if I was just another shadow among her hired staff. Something heavy sat in my chest, a strange ache that felt like a warning. I set my tea down and looked into the mirror. My eyes were tired, my hands scarred, but deep inside, a faint spark still burned, the kind that refuses to die no matter how hard life tries to crush it. I had crawled up from the dirt to become someone, and no one, no bride, no rich family, had the right to make me small again. I smiled faintly and turned off the light, but the hollow in my chest stayed. A whisper in my mind told me that this wedding wouldn't just test love. It would test the limits of my patience, my pride, and everything I'd built my life upon. But I didn't know then that wedding would be the place where they buried my self-respect. I arrived at the Whitmore's house for the family meeting on a warm Saturday afternoon. The sunlight poured over the rose bushes trimmed to perfection, each petal shining like glass. Everything about that place felt perfect, polished, and cold. Inside the large white living room, beneath a chandelier that seemed to glow without warmth, people spoke in polite tones and careful smiles. Every word weighed like money in a bank account. Mrs. Netia Whitmore, Lydia's mother, greeted me with a hand barely touching mine. "Miss Carter, what an honor to have you here," she said, light voice, heavy meaning. I sat quietly, surrounded by silk dresses and the scent of perfume that cost more than a week of my labor. Lydia and Ethan sat close together, fingers intertwined, both glowing with the ease of people who never had to fight for their place. I, meanwhile, sat across from them, feeling like a stranger in the very story I had paid to build. The meeting was about flowers, wine, lighting, and seating charts. I listened more than I spoke, answering only when a question about cost came up. I dealt with rich people all my life through work, but that day felt different. It wasn't business. It was the way they looked through me as if I were invisible. Then Lydia smiled and said softly, "Aunt Naomi, for the wedding day, you'll sit in the staff section, okay? It'll be easier that way." The room froze. I heard the pen of the planner drop onto the polished table. Ethan's expression faltered. "Lydia, enough," he murmured, his voice hesitant. But she squeezed his hand under the table and shot him a sharp look. He went silent, head down, pretending to reread the seating list. I smiled, the same kind of smile you wear when you've learned to hide pain behind grace. "As long as you're happy, that's all that matters," I whispered. Inside, the words tore something open. Lydia tilted her head and replied sweetly, "I knew you'd understand, Aunt Naomi." She turned back to her mother and continued discussing color themes as if nothing had happened. The laughter and chatter filled the room again, but I couldn't stop looking at my hands, rough, scarred from work, among all those flawless, manicured ones glittering with diamonds. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside with Ethan. The sun was setting, washing the marble driveway in gold. "Mom," he started, but his voice trailed off. I cut him off gently. "I know, son. Don't worry about me." He nodded, eyes clouded with guilt, and went back inside without another word. Driving home, I passed the old market where I'd once bought Ethan his first pair of shoes. The same kind of evening light bathed the road, but it felt colder now. I used to think love was enough to make a person belong. But in their world, love needed a presentation, and I was not part of the picture. That night, I opened my wedding expense notebook. Every line, every digit was a piece of my life. $250,000 for the venue, $80,000 for catering, $30,000 for flowers, $10,000 for the band. Each signature, a night of exhaustion. Each payment, a quiet sacrifice. I thought I was building a memory for my son's happiness, but now I realized I was paying to be excluded from it. I closed the book and stared out the window. The city lights blinked in the distance, soft and far away. I wasn't sad in the way that makes you cry. I'd survived worse, but there was a small voice inside whispering a truth I didn't want to hear. It's just a misunderstanding, I told myself. Lydia didn't mean it that way. But somewhere deep down, I knew something was shifting. A strange unease crept into me, quiet but persistent, like the feeling of being slowly erased from your own life by the very people you love most. I thought it was just a careless mistake until they made me disappear for real. The ceremony unfolded in the soft golden light of late afternoon. Chandeliers glimmered above like scattered diamonds, their reflections dancing across the polished wooden floor. I arrived early out of habit to make sure everything was in order, even though no one had asked for my opinion in weeks. I walked between rows of white-covered tables, the crystal glasses lined up like soldiers. Everything was perfect, extravagant, expensive, just the way Lydia wanted. A young staff member hurried toward me looking anxious. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you part of the crew?" she asked, holding a lanyard. Before I could answer, she slipped it around my neck. The tag read in bold letters, "Staff." For a second, I thought it was a mistake, a harmless misunderstanding. But no one corrected her. Guests swept past me in silk dresses and tailored suits, not one of them even glancing in my direction. I reached up, meaning to take the badge off, then hesitated. The look on the manager's face told me everything. To them, I was staff. I let the badge hang there and walked toward table 18, the one tucked away near the kitchen, labeled for the bride's side. I wasn't part of any side. The ceremony began. Music swelled, and Lydia appeared radiant in her white gown, glowing under the lights. She walked past me without looking, as if I were invisible. Ethan stood waiting at the end of the aisle, smiling, his eyes locked on her. The crowd rose applause, echoing through the hall like a wave. I sat down quietly. The MC's voice rang out smooth and polished. He spoke about love that transcends boundaries, and then lifted his glass. "Let's raise a toast to the Whitmore family for sponsoring this magnificent celebration." The words hit like ice. I heard the applause, the laughter, the clinking glasses. On the big screen behind the stage, glowing letters read, "The Whitmore Wedding Celebration." My family's name Carter was nowhere to be found. Then the camera panned across the room. When it reached my table, I instinctively lowered my head. The spotlight hit me just enough for the audience to see the staff tag glint against my black dress and the tear that slid down my cheek catching the light like glass. I'd cried at Ethan's graduation once out of pride. But this time the tears were heavier because I realized I'd been erased from the very story I built with my own hands. The applause faded. Laughter blurred into distant noise. A waiter stopped beside me. "Would you like some more water, ma'am?" he asked kindly. I wanted to tell him I'm the groom's mother, but the words wouldn't come. All I managed was, "No, thank you." Then Ethan took the stage with Lydia to thank both families. The light shone on his face, soft and full of promise. "We'd like to thank Lydia's parents," he said. My breath caught. Just one more line, I thought. Just one small acknowledgement, and my son will still be mine. But the words never came. Lydia squeezed his hand, smiling that practiced smile, and leaned on his shoulder. The hall filled with applause again, while I sat in the corner trying not to break in half. Across the room, Marcus was watching me. His jaw tightened, his eyes sharp with restrained anger, as if he was ready to speak up for me. But I shook my head slightly. Not yet. The music swelled again and fireworks of light burst across the ceiling. People cheered. The air shimmered with smoke and champagne. And in the middle of that perfect glittering illusion, I understood something simple and cruel. People don't have to kill you to make you disappear. They just have to stop saying your name. I stayed silent, but every silence has its limit. Dinner began under the warm glow of golden lights. The sound of glasses clinking mingled with soft jazz in the background. I sat at table 18, still wearing the staff badge no one had bothered to notice was a mistake. On stage, Lydia was radiant, Ethan beside her, both shining under the chandeliers. Around them, laughter floated through the air, a carefully rehearsed joy as polished as the silver cutlery. Marcus passed by my table, quietly placing a folded sheet of paper in front of me. It was the provisional invoice for the wedding, $500,000, my signature printed clearly at the bottom, Naomi Carter. He didn't say a word, only nodded once. His eyes told me what I needed to remember. You still hold the power here. I slipped the paper into my purse and smiled faintly. No one saw. Ethan and Lydia began their rounds, greeting each table. When they reached mine, Lydia didn't stop. She walked right past me, laughing, her perfume trailing behind. Then, as if remembering something amusing, she turned to a group of guests and said loudly, "I can't believe the maid lady is here." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, just sharp enough to slice through the room. Ethan froze, his jaw tightened, his eyes flicked toward me. "Lydia, enough," he murmured. But Lydia's hand shot out and squeezed his under the table, a silent command. He fell quiet. I looked at my son, my boy, who I'd raised through storms and sleepless nights, and saw the fear in his eyes. Fear of embarrassment, of conflict, of shattering the illusion of perfection. That was when I understood I had raised a kind man, but not a brave one. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't leave. I simply looked at Lydia. Our eyes met hers, cold and condescending, mine steady and unreadable. For a brief second, I saw a younger version of myself in her, the arrogance of someone who mistakes luxury for worth. But life had taught me otherwise. Arrogance always comes with a price. I set my wine glass down. The sound, a crisp, sharp clink, cut through the whispers nearby. My voice came out low, calm, deliberate. "All right, then." It was only 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything. "All right, then" didn't mean agreement. It meant I was done, that my silence had reached its end. I sat back down, adjusted the staff badge on my chest, and waited. A quiet storm had begun to form inside me, patient and inevitable. People turned back to their meals, the music rose again, the laughter returned. They thought the moment had passed. Only Marcus, standing at the far end of the hall, kept watching. He knew he had seen that look before in people who'd had enough. Ethan sat beside Lydia again, his face pale and strained. I watched him from across the room. All his life I had taught him how to fix things, broken pipes, engines, machines, but not how to fix himself when courage was what was missing. The laughter swelled again, glasses lifted, toasts exchanged. I stayed still, my heart oddly calm. The world around me gleamed, but all I could see was the hollowness behind it, a room full of people who mistook cruelty for class. My hand brushed against my purse, feeling the edge of the invoice inside my contracts. my proof, my leverage. I had never cared for power, but I'd learned how to use it when the moment came. I raised my eyes and found Marcus watching me. He gave a subtle nod. I returned a faint smile. Not the polite, restrained smile I'd worn all evening, but one with promise. They thought I was weak, but they forgot one thing. The silent are always the ones who know exactly where the line is drawn. I sat quietly in the corner of the ballroom. The music, the chatter, the laughter, all blended into a single hollow noise that barely reached me. The staff badge still hung from my neck, swaying lightly every time someone walked by. I'd had enough humiliation for one night. And then, through the blur of lights and champagne, I saw Marcus walking toward me. He wasn't the thin, exhausted young man I'd met 10 years ago. Back then, he'd been standing in the snow by a trash lot, shivering and holding a cardboard sign that said, "Will work for food." I had hired him to clean my house, handed him $20 and a hot meal. "Everyone deserves a fresh start," I told him that day. I didn't know those words would return to me like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Marcus walked across the ballroom slowly, each step measured and certain. When he reached me, he inclined his head and said softly but firmly, "10 years ago, you gave me a job. Today, I'm giving you justice." I blinked, caught off guard. "Justice," I repeated, a small, tired smile forming on my lips. "All I want is a quiet day, Marcus." He met my eyes, steady and serious. "You've paid for peace long enough." The words hit deep, sharp, and true. I said nothing. Marcus reached into his jacket and placed a folder on the table in front of me. One by one, he opened the pages: venue contracts, catering invoices, floral arrangements, the orchestra, the staff. Every single document bore the same signature. Mine, Naomi Carter. "You're the sole client," he said quietly. "Every service here answers to you." They forgot that, but the paperwork didn't. I traced my fingers along the inked lines, each one a memory, months of planning, years of sacrifice, decades of work. While they erased my name from the celebration, the entire night was still built under it. Marcus looked at me, voice gentler now. "You gave me dignity when I had none. Tonight, I can finally return the favor, not with gratitude, with justice." I laughed softly, though my throat tightened. "I don't need anyone to repay me, Marcus." "It's not repayment," he said. "It's fairness." Fairness. The words settled inside me like an ember reigniting. I had lived my whole life believing love was enough, that patience could heal anything. I thought silence was strength. But Marcus was right. Peace had cost me too much. There are debts only truth can settle. I followed his gaze toward the stage. Lydia stood there, radiant, laughing, the diamond on her finger catching every bit of light. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice steady, though something inside me began to shift. "Nothing," he replied. "Just be ready to tell the truth. I'll handle the rest." When I looked back at him, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Faith. Not in me as someone broken or pitied, but as someone capable, someone strong. All my life I thought giving love meant surrender, that to protect my son's happiness I had to stay small. But now, for the first time, I saw the truth. Protecting him didn't mean letting them destroy me. I gripped the folder tightly, feeling its weight, the weight of my worth, my name, my story. For the first time that night, I could breathe. Marcus placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "People who bow out of love are often the strongest," he said. "But even the strongest must stand up when someone steps on their dignity." I nodded slowly. In that moment, something inside me rose, quiet but unbreakable. I was no longer the invisible mother or the humiliated guest. I was Naomi Carter, the woman who built this entire night and the one who would decide how it ended. I understand now, I said. Justice doesn't come to you. You have to claim it. I stayed seated after Marcus left, watching him disappear into the crowd, bathed in golden light. The crystal chandeliers shimmered above their reflections, rippling across the tablecloth and the sheets he'd left behind. I unfolded them, and the truth stared back at me, sharp and undeniable. My name, Naomi Carter, appeared on every line. $85,000 for catering, $40,000 for flowers, $28,000 for the orchestra, $150,000 for the venue. Every payment, every authorization, every agreement ran through my company. I was the only person who could approve the final transfer, the only signature that could keep this night alive. Marcus returned a moment later, calm but resolute. He set the last page before me. "Without your signature," he said quietly, "this entire event stops." I lifted my gaze to the stage. Lydia was radiant beneath the lights, smiling for the cameras, every movement rehearsed. The guests clapped, glasses clinked, laughter filled the air. It was the kind of beauty that blinds, too polished, too perfect. Ethan stood beside her, his smile thin, practiced. I leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Now it's my turn to teach them a lesson. He gave a small nod, eyes glinting. A check can buy a wedding, but it can't buy self-respect. I smiled faintly. The words struck deep like a bell tolling in my chest. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time that night, I felt something shift control. I had always believed power belonged to those who stood above others, to people with wealth, titles, or voices that carried weight. But now I understood power lived right here, in my signature, the one thing they could never take from me. I looked at the lines of ink already dry. Each stroke represented a lifetime of work, of nights spent scrubbing floors, of years surviving without complaint. My signature wasn't just ink. It was proof that I had built something with my own hands, and that gave it worth. Marcus stood silently for a moment, then said, "You know, I used to think my signature meant nothing. Now I understand it's the only proof that I exist." I nodded. "You're right, but the real power isn't on paper. It's in the moment you decide why to use it." I closed the folder and looked around the hall. Every smile, every toast, every sparkle of light belonged to them. But the foundation beneath it all, the contracts, the payments, the authority, belonged to me. And with one motion of my hand, I could erase everything they thought was theirs. My heart beat steadily, not with rage, but with clarity. It was the calm before a storm, the kind of silence that feels like truth sharpening itself. Marcus gestured toward the event coordinators. I saw the venue manager glance at me, nervous. She knew whose name was on the paperwork. Everyone did. They were all waiting for one thing, my final signature, the authorization to keep this dream running. I picked up the pen, hovering it above the line marked Final Payment Authorization. $300,000. The ink gleamed under the light, but I didn't sign. Not yet. I smiled instead. I wanted them to thank me first while believing I was no one. I wanted them to celebrate the lie before the truth shattered it. Marcus's voice broke the quiet. "What will you do?" "I'll let them write the beginning of their lesson," I said, "and I'll write the ending." He bowed his head slightly, a silent vow of respect, and disappeared back into the crowd. I sat there alone, surrounded by luxury. I'd paid for the pen, still resting between my fingers. On stage, Lydia was still laughing, the confident, careless laughter of someone who thought she owned the world. She had no idea that the same signature which created this dream could also end it. I exhaled calm and certain and whispered to myself, justice is about to find its way into this room. And then the dream wedding began to crumble, starting with the very first thank you. The sound of clinking glasses echoed like the opening cue of a perfectly rehearsed performance. Lydia stood on stage smiling under the warm lights, her voice smooth through the microphone. "Today is the happiest day of my life," she said, "and none of this would have been possible without the love and support of my parents and everyone here." Applause burst across the room, followed by laughter and cheers. I sat at the far end of the hall, fingers still wrapped around the pen I'd refused to use. Her words, my parents, rang in my ears like a quiet mockery. No mention of me, no acknowledgement that I existed. Then suddenly, the light in the ballroom dimmed. Across the room, Marcus stood by the control booth. He caught my gaze, gave a small nod. I returned it, not as permission, but as agreement. He understood. So did I. The time had come. Just as Lydia raised her champagne glass for the final toast, the giant LED screen behind her flickered to life. A white flash cut across the dark, forcing the crowd to blink. Then, in clean, bold letters, the words appeared, sponsored by Carter Sanitation Services, Naomi Carter. The room froze. The music stopped mid-beat. Laughter hung in the air unfinished. Lydia turned, still smiling, but her expression faltered as she read the text. Ethan's face drained of color. Whispers broke the silence. "Naomi Carter? Who's that? Isn't that the groom's mother? Carter Sanitation? Is that a cleaning company?" Lydia lowered her glass, trying to smile. "There must be some mistake," she said into the mic, her voice trembling slightly. Then Marcus appeared from backstage. He walked slowly, confidently through the stunned silence. The light followed him, slicing through the golden haze of the ballroom until it landed on the table where I sat. He stopped in front of me. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then he reached forward and unhooked the staff badge from around my neck. The soft click of the clasp echoed through the hall, sharper than any sound that night. Marcus set the badge down on a nearby table and said clearly, each word cutting the air, "She's not staff. She's the one paying every single person here." Gasps rippled through the room, followed by the scraping of chairs and muffled voices. Faces turned. Every eye found me. I remained still, my hands folded neatly on the table, my gaze fixed on Lydia. She stood frozen, her smile gone, the glass in her hand trembling. A drop of red wine spilled down the side of her gown, staining the white fabric like a wound. I rose from my chair. The air seemed to thicken around me. I walked toward the stage, not fast, not slow, just steady, as though time itself had slowed down to make room for this moment. When I stopped in front of Lydia, the room was silent enough to hear the faint hum of the lights. "You told me I should know my place," I said, my voice calm, every word sharp as glass. "Now I do, and it's not beneath you." The words echoed across the hall, bouncing off the chandeliers, heavy and final. No one dared move. Lydia stared at me, her eyes wide, lips trembling, tears threatening but refusing to fall. Ethan took a hesitant step forward. "Mom," he whispered. His voice was small, fragile, like a child's. I didn't turn to him. My eyes never left Lydia's. Marcus stood to the side, silent, watching. Behind us, the LED screen still glowed with my name, white against black, sponsored by Naomi Carter. I looked at the MC, who was frozen in place. "Thank you," I said softly. "The party may continue now." But no one moved. The laughter was gone. The illusion had shattered. What filled the room now was the heavy, suffocating weight of realization that everything they'd believed about this perfect night was a lie. I stepped back, my gaze resting once more on the glowing screen behind Lydia. She stood there, the flawless bride, illuminated by the truth she'd tried so hard to bury. The ballroom was utterly still, and I knew it was time to end this celebration. The room was still frozen in silence after Marcus laid the staff badge on the table. The LED screen's harsh white glow washed over Lydia's face, cracking the perfection of her makeup like porcelain under strain. Ethan stood behind her, torn between shame and disbelief, his eyes fixed on me as though seeing me for the first time. I turned back to the table where the final check lay, $430,000, the number that had haunted my nights, the sum of my sacrifices. Every line I'd signed, every dollar I'd earned with scraped hands and sleepless nights had built this moment. But now it wasn't a symbol of devotion anymore. It was a symbol of power, the power to stop everything. I picked up the check. The paper felt cold, thin, heavier than it should have been. Around me, the guests murmured, uneasy, some filming on their phones, others frozen mid-step, as if movement itself had become dangerous. I stepped toward the center of the hall and spoke, my voice steady but cutting through the still air. I paid for everything in this room, the flowers, the champagne, the music, even the fake smiles on some of your faces. Lydia's voice trembled. "You can't. You have no right." I met her gaze. "You turned me into the help at a wedding I paid for. That was the biggest mistake of your life." Across the room, Marcus stood near the sound booth. Our eyes met. I gave a small nod. The music stopped. No more strings, no soft laughter, just the pounding of hearts and the sound of my own breath. I raised the check high. The lights reflected off it, making the bold black digits blaze across the room like a wound of truth. And then I tore it in half. The sound, a single sharp rip, sliced through the silence. It wasn't loud, but in that moment, it was deafening. Someone gasped, a glass shattered, a woman cried out softly. I spoke slowly, clearly, letting the words hang in the air. "The party's over." No one moved. For 3 long seconds, the world held its breath. Then the lights dimmed. The staff, led by Marcus, began to move quietly. They cleared glasses, blew out candles, stacked chairs. The sounds of clinking silverware and soft footsteps filled the void, the sound of an ending. A guest tried to laugh. "It's just a joke, right?" But his voice cracked, thin and hollow. Ethan came toward me, panic in his eyes. "Mom, please don't do this in front of everyone." I turned to him, my voice soft but heavy. "Do you know what hurts the most, Ethan? It's not being mistaken for a maid. It's realizing my own son couldn't stand beside me in a room full of strangers." His lips parted, but no words came out. Lydia staggered back, her gown dragging through spilled wine and broken glass. She wasn't the perfect bride anymore, just a woman watching her illusion crumble. Marcus signaled to cut the main lights. The LED screen's glow dimmed, leaving a faint halo over the staff badge still lying on the table. I walked to it, picked it up, studied it for a moment, then placed it gently into Lydia's trembling hand. "Now it's yours." The room was dead silent. The air smelled of wilted flowers and spilled liquor, the aftertaste of everything fake. I turned away and began walking toward the doors. Behind me, I could hear Lydia's breath hitching, Marcus's calm voice giving quiet orders, and Ethan's faint, broken mom fading into the background. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was cold, clean, and real. I inhaled deeply, feeling something I hadn't in years: freedom. The story didn't end there. The storm had only just begun. 3 days later, the story of that wedding and of me was everywhere. Every social feed, every local paper, every news site had the same headline: Bride's $430K wedding canceled by her mother-in-law. The photo that went viral was the moment I tore the check in half. A dark-skinned woman in a simple dress standing in a glittering ballroom as the lights went out. No caption needed. The image spoke for itself. Truth can be expensive, but it can't be bought. The Whitmore family stayed silent at first, trying to manage the narrative like they always did. But this wasn't a story you could bury. Sponsors pulled out. Charity boards cut ties. People who once called Lydia the new queen of society suddenly forgot her name. A week later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice was rough, tired. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said quietly. I didn't answer. Just listened to the wind on his end of the line. "I was scared," he went on, "scared to lose her. I knew Lydia was wrong, but I thought if I stood up to her, she'd leave. I didn't want to lose the woman I loved." I took a slow breath. "Ethan," I said, "you didn't just lose her. You lost yourself, and that's worse." Silence. Then he said softer this time, "I know, Mom. I know that now." When the call ended, I sat for a while, staring at the city skyline. I hadn't wanted revenge. I only wanted my son to see clearly beyond the illusions that had blinded him. As for Lydia, she vanished. Someone told me she'd been cut off from the Whitmore family, living quietly, avoiding cameras and parties. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity either. Sometimes silence itself is the fairest punishment. That afternoon, Marcus came to my office. No suit this time, just a rolled-up shirt and an easy calm in his face. He placed a folder on my desk. "Carter and Reed Facility Group," he said with a quiet pride. "Half yours, half mine. Let's build something real, something that lasts." I looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't think I needed to start over," I said. "You're not starting over," he replied. "You're continuing, just on your own terms." I opened the folder. Fresh white pages. A new logo, Carter and Reed. For the first time in a long time, I felt that maybe destruction wasn't the end. It was just the ground we rebuild on. We talked for hours. Marcus told me that after the wedding, dozens of clients had reached out. They wanted to work with people who had principles. I laughed softly. Who would have guessed integrity's good for business now? He smiled too. No bitterness, just quiet satisfaction. That night back home, I stood by the window. The city glowed in gold and silver, alive and restless. For years, I had carried the weight of sacrifice, the burden of being unseen. But that night, for the first time, I felt something else: peace. I didn't need to be called a hero or strong woman. I didn't need applause. All I needed was to know I had stayed true when everything around me was built on lies. I thought of Ethan, of Lydia, of everyone who had stayed silent that night. Eventually, life forces everyone to face their moment, the one where the mask cracks and who you truly are steps into the light. It hurts, but that pain is how you finally learn to live honestly. I traced my fingers over the new company logo and smiled. One story had ended, another had begun. A year later, I finally understood some wounds aren't punishments. They're just how life teaches us to stand taller. A year had passed since the night I tore the $430,000 check and ended what the press called the wedding of the summer. Life didn't return to peace right away, but maybe peace was never meant to come suddenly. It came slowly, like sunlight after a storm, soft and patient, revealing what had survived beneath the wreckage. That morning, I stood in front of our new office building, staring at the gleaming metal sign that reflected my face in the light. The words were engraved in silver: Carter and Reed Facility Group, built with honor. I read it again, word by word, like reciting a quiet vow. There were no frills, no fancy titles, just two people, a woman once mistaken for the help, and a man who used to be homeless. Together, we rebuilt everything from the ground up, not with pride, but with dignity. Marcus stepped out of the office holding 2 cups of coffee. "Look at us," he said with a half smile. "Who would have thought we'd make it this far?" I smiled back. "It's not about how far we've gone," I said. "It's about finally walking in the right direction." He chuckled, then his expression softened. "You know, Naomi, I still remember that night when you tore the check. The whole room went silent. I've never seen an act so ruthless and so beautiful." I met his eyes, calm and steady. "It wasn't ruthless," I said. "It was honest." Marcus nodded slowly. "This isn't revenge. This is justice." The words hung in the air, echoing faintly like a church bell after rain. He was right. It had never been about revenge. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted the truth to finally stand where it belonged. From across the lot, the office door opened. Ethan walked in wearing a plain shirt, holding a stack of papers, a little awkward, a little humbled. My son was back not as a successful engineer or someone chasing appearances, but as an apprentice ready to learn from the ground up. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I looked at him, then nodded. "Welcome home." And we both knew home didn't mean a place. It meant belonging. It meant finally coming back to yourself. Ethan worked hard. He didn't talk much, but sometimes when we walked past the framed photo of our company's first day, I caught a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Not pride in money or reputation, but pride in rebuilding life the right way. As dusk settled, the office lights dimmed one by one. I stayed behind, sitting at my desk as the last rays of sunset spilled through the window. I opened an old notebook and began to write. Marcus said he might turn these words into our company's motto, but to me, they were something more. They were my story's ending. They called me the help. Maybe they were right. I've spent my life cleaning up other people's messes. The only difference is that night, I cleaned the lies out of my own life. Justice doesn't need a courtroom. It only needs one person brave enough to stand up and say, "I deserve respect." I set the pen down and looked out through the glass. The city buzzed below, but in my heart, everything was still. True peace, I realized, isn't the absence of storms. It's learning how to stand tall in the rain. A quiet smile found its way to my lips. No bitterness, no anger. I had done the one thing I'd feared all my life. I stood up in a room full of people and said I deserved to be seen. The golden light from the office reflected against the sign outside, the words "built with honor" glowing softly in the twilight. I touched the glass, whispered to no one in particular, "I don't need their apology. I just need them to remember, justice wears the face of an ordinary woman." Outside, the sky was clear, vast, and gentle. The light stretched across the street, bathing the new sign in warmth. And in that moment, I knew every storm must end, and the most beautiful endings are the ones where we finally find ourselves again.